Some of the most beloved sitcom stars in television history didn't just fade away quietly. They died under circumstances that didn't add up, deaths that raised questions, deaths that sparked investigations, deaths that left families searching for answers. Some were ruled accidents, some were ruled suicides, some were ruled natural causes, some were ruled open and shut with barely an examination. But if you dig deeper into the details, if you look at the evidence that was buried and the questions that went unanswered, you start to see a pattern of mystery. This isn't conspiracy theory, this is documented fact. These are cases where multiple people questioned the official story, where evidence didn't align, where investigators had suspicions they couldn't prove, where families and friends whispered that something wasn't right, where the investigations were closed too quickly. Today we're examining 20 sitcom stars whose deaths remain shrouded in mystery and suspicion. Their cases involve ambiguous evidence, questionable timelines, and circumstances that don't add up. Some involved investigations that went nowhere. Some involved evidence that disappeared. Some involved stories that changed multiple times. Some involved investigators naming suspects they never charged. These are the cases Hollywood tried to move past quietly. The deaths that didn't make sense, but nobody wanted to keep asking questions about. The cases that were filed away and forgotten, but the questions remained, and they remain today. 1. Phil Hartman. Phil Hartman was a comedy legend. His work on Saturday Night Live and news radio made him one of the most respected performers in television. But in May 1998, he was shot multiple times in his home while sleeping. His wife Bryn shot him, but the circumstances surrounding that night were murky and deeply disputed. Bryn claimed she did not remember shooting him. She said they had been drinking heavily that night and that she had blacked out. She called 911 and confessed, but then recanted parts of her story, changing her account of what happened. During the investigation, details emerged about their volatile relationship, about fights and screaming arguments, about intoxication that had defined their marriage. A neighbor heard screaming, another heard gunshots. But what exactly happened in that house that night? Why were there so many conflicting accounts? Why did her story change? Bryn later claimed the gun went off accidentally during a struggle. But Hartman was shot multiple times. The investigation concluded it was murder, but Britain's mental state and the exact sequence of events remained unclear. She died before trial, taking many answers to the grave. The world never got the full truth about what happened. 2. Robert Blake. Robert Blake's wife, Bonnie Lee Backley, was found shot to death in a parked car outside a Los Angeles restaurant in 2001. Blake claimed he had stepped away from the car to retrieve a gun from inside the restaurant. When he returned, she was dead, but the evidence didn't add up. The gun he said he retrieved was not the murder weapon. The timeline he provided didn't match witness accounts. Investigators discovered that Blake had been asking stuntmen and associates to kill his wife. Multiple people testified that Blake had solicited murder. The stuntmen testified to this fact under oath. Blake's own words and actions suggested clear motive and premeditation. At trial, Blake was acquitted due to insufficient evidence and legal technicalities. But a civil court later found him liable for her death, a verdict that civil juries issue when they believe someone is guilty, even if criminal guilt wasn't proven beyond a reasonable doubt. So which was it? Was he guilty or not guilty? The ambiguity surrounding this case remains one of Hollywood's great mysteries. Did the jury make the right call? Or did a skilled legal team create reasonable doubt where guilt actually existed? 3. Robert Pastorelli. Robert Pastorelli's girlfriend was found dead in their Hollywood home in 1999 from a gunshot wound. The death was ruled a suicide, but questions remained. Pastorelli claimed innocence. Investigators named him as a person of interest, but never charged him. The case remained open for years. Why did she die? Was it truly suicide or was she murdered? What exactly happened in that house? The official ruling provided closure, but the details never fully made sense. Pastorelli himself died years later from an overdose. His death came while he was still under suspicion in his girlfriend's case. The lack of clarity around her death and the circumstances of his own death created a narrative of mystery and unanswered questions that defined both of their legacies. 4. Brittany Murphy. Brittany Murphy died in December 2009 from pneumonia, but the circumstances were deeply suspicious and raised immediate red flags. Her husband Simon Monjack died just 5 months later in the same house from the exact same causes. The odds of two people dying from the same disease in the same location within months of each other are astronomical, so rare that statisticians would call it virtually impossible. The coroner ruled both deaths as accidental or natural, but investigators questioned whether something more sinister was at play. Was there a toxic substance in the house that both had been exposed to? Was there mold? Was there carbon monoxide? Was there something else? Toxicologists couldn't explain the parallel deaths. Friends had expressed concern that Monjak was controlling and manipulative. He died so quickly after her. The parallels were too striking to ignore. Her parents raised questions about the circumstances. Yet the official conclusion was that both deaths were natural. No foul play. No investigation into Monjak's role or potential involvement. The case was closed. The case remains one of the most suspicious deaths in entertainment history, yet it was officially ruled as routine and closed without the thorough investigation that such bizarre circumstances demanded. 5. John Belushi. John Belushi died in 1982 from a drug overdose. That much is established fact. But the details around his death remain murky and contested. He was with multiple people that night, including a woman named Kathy Smith. The exact sequence of events is disputed by those who were present. Who injected what? Who provided the drugs? Did someone deliberately give him a lethal dose knowing it would kill him? Kathy Smith was eventually convicted of involuntary manslaughter, suggesting that foul play may have been involved in his death. But was it murder, or was it simply a tragic overdose in the presence of others who didn't stop him? The circumstances were never fully clarified or disclosed. The investigation focused on drug use rather than on whether Belushi's death was deliberately caused. Some have suggested that Smith intentionally gave him a hot shot. Others have suggested it was accidental. His death remains one of the most ambiguous in entertainment history, shrouded in questions about whether it was murder or tragedy. 6. Natalie Wood. Natalie Wood drowned in 1981 off the coast of California. That was the official ruling. But questions about her death have persisted for over 4 decades, never fully answered. She was on a boat with her husband Robert Wagner and another actor named Christopher Walken. What exactly happened that night? How did she end up in the ocean? The timeline provided by those present didn't make sense. Witnesses reported hearing arguments on the boat. Bruising on her body suggested a struggle, not a simple fall. The official investigation was closed remarkably quickly despite these inconsistencies. In 2018, investigators reopened the case and named Wagner as a person of interest. Decades had passed. Key evidence had been lost. Witnesses had died or their memories had faded. But the suspicion remained that something violent happened on that boat, that her death was not the accident it was officially ruled. Wagner maintained his innocence throughout, but the case demonstrated how quickly a death can be officially closed and forgotten, even when evidence suggests otherwise. The lack of transparency and the hasty closure of the investigation fueled decades of speculation. 7. Glenn Quinn from Roseanne died from a heroin overdose in 2002. But the circumstances around his death raised questions. He was found on a friend's couch. How had he gotten there? Had he injected himself or had someone else? Was he alone when it happened? The investigation was minimal. The assumption was that it was a simple overdose death, a junkie using drugs. Case closed. But his family and friends questioned whether more investigation should have been done, whether foul play had been involved. The death was ruled accidental, but the details were never thoroughly examined. In a case involving a famous actor and drugs, wouldn't more questions have been asked? Or was Glenn Quinn deemed not important enough to warrant a thorough investigation? 8. Chris Farley. Chris Farley died in December 1997 from a cocaine and morphine overdose, but the details of his final night remain hazy. He was with a woman named Kate before his death. The timeline of events is disputed. When exactly did he die? How much time passed before he was found? What role did Kate play in his final hours? The investigation was cursory. The conclusion was obvious. A drug addict overdosed. But questions remained about the circumstances, about the drugs he had taken, about whether someone else had been involved in his death. His body was found in his apartment days later. How long had he been dead? The investigation focused on his substance abuse rather than on a thorough examination of the events surrounding his death. 9. Corey Haim. Corey Haim died in 2010 at age 38. The official cause was pneumonia, but the circumstances around his death were questioned. He was a known drug user. He had been battling addiction for years. But did he simply have pneumonia? Or was there something more? His death came suddenly. The investigation was minimal. His mother said he had been sick, but his death was unexpected and sudden. Was it truly pneumonia or was it something else? Had he overdosed? Had someone harmed him? The official ruling provided closure, but the details were never thoroughly examined. For a celebrity death, the investigation seemed remarkably brief. 10. Gail Fisher, best known for playing Peggy on Mannix, died in 2000. The official cause was kidney failure, but the circumstances around her death were questioned by those close to her. She had been struggling with health issues for years, but her death came suddenly. The investigation into her death was minimal. Her family raised questions about the circumstances, but the case was closed quickly. For a television star of her prominence, very little investigation seemed to occur. The questions surrounding her death were never satisfactorily answered. If you're finding these stories interesting and you want to see more investigations into the unexplained deaths of entertainment figures, drop a 1 in the comments below. Subscribe and hit the bell if you haven't already so you don't miss future content examining the cases. Hollywood. Try to forget your support helps us keep telling these stories. Now let's continue. 11. Andrew Koenig. Andrew Koenig from Family Ties died in 2010. His death was initially ruled undetermined, then it was ruled a suicide. But the circumstances were questioned. He was found in a park. How had he ended up there? The investigation was not thorough. His family questioned the official ruling. They believed there were unanswered questions about the circumstances of his death. The ruling was eventually confirmed as suicide, but the details remained murky. The investigation could have been more comprehensive. For a beloved television star, the examination of his death seemed cursory and incomplete. His family continued to question what had really happened that day. 12. Dana Plato. Dana Plato from Different Strokes died in 1999. The official ruling was accidental overdose, but the circumstances were ambiguous. She had called into a radio show saying she was doing better. The next day she was dead. Had she deliberately taken her own life? Had it been accidental? The investigation was minimal. The conclusion was reached quickly. But those close to her questioned whether more investigation should have been conducted, whether the truth of what happened that day was ever fully explored. Her death became another case that was closed too quickly without sufficient examination of the facts. Freddie Prinze Sr. Freddie Prinze shot himself in 1977. He left a suicide note, but the circumstances around his death have been questioned over the years. He was on the phone with his manager when he shot himself. The details of that conversation are disputed. What was said? What state was he in mentally? The investigation concluded it was suicide, but those close to him have questioned whether he was truly suicidal or whether something else was happening. His young son later became an actor and has spoken about growing up without his father and the questions that surrounded his death. The official ruling provided closure, but some questions remained unanswered. 14. Bob Saget. Bob Saget died in January 2022 from head trauma, but the circumstances around his death raised serious questions that were never fully answered. He was found in his hotel room with no clear explanation of how he sustained the fatal injury. Did he fall? Was he struck by someone? Had he been in an altercation with another guest? Had he been robbed? The investigation concluded it was accidental, likely from a fall, but the details were never fully explained or released to the public. How did a healthy man end up with fatal head trauma in a hotel room with no clear cause? The autopsy found evidence of impact, but the source of that impact was never definitively determined or publicly disclosed. There were conflicting reports about the circumstances. For a prominent television personality, the investigation seemed remarkably incomplete. The family raised some questions, but the case was closed. The hotel records were not made fully public. The exact manner of his death remained murky and open to speculation. A man found dead in a hotel room with unexplained injuries deserved more thorough investigation. 15. Tanya Roberts. Tanya Roberts died in January 2021. The official cause was a urinary tract infection that had spread to sepsis. But the circumstances were questioned. She had been missing. She was found after days. By the time she reached the hospital, it was too late. How had she ended up in that condition? Had she been neglected? Had someone failed to check on her? The investigation focused on her medical condition rather than on the circumstances that led to it. Questions remained about the events preceding her death and whether someone should have provided care sooner. 16. Richard Belzer. Richard Belzer died in 2023 from pneumonia, but the investigation into his death was minimal. He was 78 years old and had been dealing with health issues, but his death came suddenly. Those close to him questioned whether the investigation was thorough enough. For a legendary television personality, very little investigation seemed to occur. The case was closed quickly with minimal examination of the circumstances surrounding his death. 17. Norman Fell from Three's Company died in 1998 from cancer. The official ruling was straightforward, but those close to him questioned the investigation. He had been in treatment, but his death came suddenly and unexpectedly. Had the medical care been adequate? Had something been missed? The investigation was minimal. the case was closed quickly. But questions remained about whether the circumstances had been thoroughly examined. 18. Ted Knight. Ted Knight died in 1986 from cancer, but his death came suddenly and unexpectedly. Those close to him questioned whether the medical care had been adequate, whether the progression of his illness had been properly monitored. The investigation was minimal. The case was closed quickly, but questions remained about whether the circumstances had been thoroughly examined and whether all relevant details had been disclosed. 19. Amy Winehouse died in 2011 from alcohol poisoning, but the circumstances around her death raised questions. She had been struggling with substance abuse for years, but her death came suddenly. The investigation concluded it was accidental, but those who knew her questioned whether more investigation should have been conducted. Whether the exact circumstances had been fully explored, her body was found at her home. The investigation was conducted, but some details remained unclear or disputed. 20. Whitney Houston. Whitney Houston died in a bathtub in 2012. The official cause was accidental drowning, with drug use as a contributing factor. But the circumstances raised questions. How had she drowned? Had she lost consciousness? Had someone been present? The investigation concluded it was accidental, but those close to her questioned whether more investigation should have been conducted, whether the exact circumstances had been fully explored. The investigation seemed to reach its conclusion quickly, without thoroughly examining all aspects of her final moments. Questions remained about what exactly happened in that bathtub, and whether all relevant details had been discovered. These are 20 cases where the official story didn't fully satisfy those seeking answers, where investigations could have been more thorough, where questions remained unanswered. In many of these cases, the investigations were closed quickly. The cases were filed away. The questions were buried. But the people who loved these entertainers continued to wonder. What really happened that night? Was the official ruling accurate? Were all the facts examined? These questions matter. When a public figure dies under suspicious circumstances, their death deserves thorough investigation. Not a quick conclusion, not a rushed ruling, but genuine, complete examination of the facts. Some of these cases may never be fully solved. Evidence has been lost, time has passed, witnesses have moved on. But the questions remain, and they should remain. Because the truth matters, even when the person who deserves to know it is no longer alive to hear it. If you believe a death deserves investigation, speak up. If you have information about a case, come forward. If you suspect foul play, report it. The entertainment industry has protected too many secrets for too long. The deaths of these 20 stars deserve our attention. They deserve our questions. If this video helped you understand these cases better, like and subscribe. Share this with someone who believes these stories matter. See you in the next one.